It's peer-to-peer, people can exchange it, and it's digital. And doing this well with the right trade-offs is actually surprisingly difficult because you have to think about what's the right level of centralization versus the right level of decentralization. So we will move right along to the next small segment, and this will be the second to the last segment, and we're going to talk about the third type of problem that is well suited for blockchain or this modern blockchain architecture, and that is digital assets. Of course, this is very familiar because basically every blockchain is doing some sort of digital asset one way or the other. But I hope we can help you appreciate the different approach on how we do digital assets and why it is so much more powerful than many of the current systems. And in fact, we're going to ask a slightly different question than is answered with blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum. It's a slightly different question. The question is, how can we create a centrally issued digital asset that is peer-to-peer, all the same, peer-to-peer tradable or exchangeable? A very subtle difference between what Bitcoin and Ethereum do, because those are not centrally issued, they're mined by the miners and so forth. So obviously, we're targeting a different use case and a different audience for this question. What we're targeting are, let's look at this diagram. This diagram comes from the Bank of International Settlements. This is what we call the digital asset flower, right? And what we have are 4 different categories of assets that are exchanged between, people. First category is whether it's centrally issued. Here, in their case, it's central bank issued. Whether it's digital, whether it's peer-to-peer, people can exchange it peer-to-peer without having to go to a central bank, for example. And is it widely accessible? Is it usable by the common person? And so you have various assets that are in these different segments of this diagram. For example, Bitcoin being peer-to-peer and not centrally issued exists here. The Ether token exists here as well. Bank deposits, Ripple here, virtual currency, this is, points and airline miles and things like that. But if I may say, kind of the holy grail of this picture is what exists right here in the center, where we have something that is centrally issued. For example, it could be a central bank that issues municipal currency or a government currency, but it's widely accessible to the public. It's peer-to-peer, people can exchange it, and it's digital. And doing this well with the right trade-offs is actually surprisingly difficult because you have to think about what's the right level of centralization versus the right level of decentralization in a way that can be adopted by, say, a central bank. That's the question that we're trying to take. And basically, we're talking about digital money. That's, in a nutshell, how do we build real digital money, a real digital form of a fiat currency that people can exchange on their phones. But it's not just digital currency. I'll give you a few other use cases, but this is how what we call this digital currency. We have a name for it. It's digital bearer instruments. How it stacks up against the other types of currency. Here, where Bitcoin is somewhat scalable, somewhat not scalable, but it's relatively, it's bearer owned. Your keys, your Bitcoin, censorship resistant, is digital, right? As opposed to regular cash, which has all these capabilities, but you can't transfer a lot of money from one country to the other because currency export laws. Bank accounts have most of the properties, but your bank deposit isn't owned by you. It's owned by the bank. You've actually lent your money to the bank so that the bank actually owns it. And when you go to the ATM and get your money, you're actually asking the bank whether you can get your cash or not, and they can reject that legally. And it's not censorship resistant. Okay, so the question is, what trade-offs can we accept for digital money. And so there's a concept of a digital bearer instrument, which has all these with the only caveat that it's not wholly censorship resistant. I think in the case of like buying a coffee at a Tully's cafe, maybe you don't really need censorship resistance. And so this is the fine, subtle point that we're making as to versus a Bitcoin, which does have value in our economy. But for the other things, such as just buying a lunch and you want it to be digital cash, I'll give you a few other use cases here. So the central bank issued digital currency, petrol currency. If you think about value, digital assets that are exchanged between small, medium-sized enterprises, between industries, an oil producer versus an oil consumer, someone that processes the oil. There could be digital assets which are issued by some central authority. I mean, it doesn't have to be a global central authority. It can be simply for that industry. And it's exchanged between the peers. And so the list goes on. Energy credits, financial factoring. This is one of my favorite use cases. If I'm a small, medium-sized company and I've done some service for another company and I've issued an invoice, I may not be paid for that invoice for the next 60 or 30, 90 days, but I need cash right now. So, this can be played into a digital asset sort of scenario if it's a closed system. And last, but certainly not least, if we think about non-fungible tokens, and this is the question that was asked earlier, we can talk about even gaming assets. Gaming meaning, video games. If I earn or buy a spaceship in a game, I can exchange that and trade it outside the game, and then the person who receives it actually owns it and then can use it within the game. So we're talking about the whole gamut of use cases where the asset is centrally issued, peer-to-peer exchangeable. And to explain this concept of bearer instruments, it's centrally issued, it's redeemable through an issuer, it's bearer-owned and controlled, and it's peer-to-peer transferable. And actually, we've set this up here to give you guys a demonstration of a digital asset platform that's operational. And so later, after the talks, you can actually come and play with it, a live demo of the system.